Okay, Matthew 19. If you know anything about the Gospels, you know that people are always coming to Jesus with questions about anything and everything, life, God, theology. Here's one sample, Matthew 19. Let's pick up the story in 3. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for, notice the language, any and every reason? Now, in the first century, people were asking all kinds of questions about love and romance and sexuality and marriage, but specifically about divorce. Nothing like the world we are a part of today. Because divorce, contrary to what you may think about kind of first century conservative culture, divorce was actually like at pandemic levels in Jesus' day. Now, I would argue divorce is like love gone awry. Would you agree with that? Divorce is like what happens when love goes south and breaks into pieces when there are holes at the bottom of the boat. And people come to Jesus with questions about divorce. Now, you need to understand there was an obscure text deep in the Torah in Deuteronomy 24 where Moses allows divorce if a man finds, and the text says, something indecent about his wife. Now, in Jesus' day, people were all asking questions like, what the heck is something indecent? And there were 2 major schools of thought. One was called the House of Shammai, who followed the teachings of Rabbi Shammai. And he was hyper kind of right-wing conservative. And his interpretation of Deuteronomy was, listen, there's only one way out of marriage, and that is adultery. There's something indecent. His interpretation of that was adultery. But on the other side was a dude named Hillel and the house of Hillel. And the followers of Hillel were kind of like the leftist progressives, we live in Portland type of people, right? And Hillel's take was, no, that's not what that means. What Deuteronomy means is, listen, anything. If your wife gains 5 pounds, ooh, something indecent, divorce her. Right? Like if she gets wrinkles, oh my goodness, something indecent, Deuteronomy 24, divorce her. Seriously, we have rabbinic writings where he, dead serious, says if she burns the bread, something indecent, divorce her. And what happens in the story is people come to Jesus okay, what's your take? What side are you on? Are you with Shammai or Hillel? Hillel, by the way, was by far the majority popular view. And Jesus fires back. But before we get to Jesus' answer, don't you think it's interesting? Here we are 2,000 years later after evolving as a species, and are we really any different? No, we're really asking the same questions. We have divorce. How many of you are children of divorce? Yeah, lots of you. The majority of you. Here we are years later struggling with the same dysfunction and brokenness. Something is, I would argue, kind of out of whack. Now, you all know the stats. Over 50% of marriages end in divorce. Right now, because you hear that all the time growing up in a place like Portland, you get numb and kind of indifferent to how shocking that is. But do you realize how sketchy the odds of love surviving more than a year or 2 really are? Anybody here engaged? Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, back here. Hey, what are your names? No names? What? You're I didn't think you would come over here. What are your names?
Vasily and Julie.
Julie and what?
Vasily.
Where are you from? Russia. Russians. Seriously, you Russians are taking over Portland. What is wrong with you? Welcome to the Russians. Okay, what's the date? August 20th. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have a coin. Heads or tails? Vasily. What? I don't believe in divorces either, but heads or tails? Heads? Ladies and gentlemen. Never mind. Don't worry, that's not a prophecy, and you're Russians anyways, which means if you don't like what I say, you disappear me in the back of the trunk, right? No, dude. Really happy you are here. Seriously, listen. Those are the odds. Right here, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the odds of the person you're in love with or dreaming about falling in love with, those are the odds of your marriage lasting more than a few short, ephemeral years. Now, here's the stat that is more shocking, not that one. How many of you want to get married? You understand the odds, right? That to me, listen, that is the shocking stat to me. 99% of people in the room here tonight want to get married. If not, what are you doing here? But we are happy you are here and you're faking, but that's okay. And 95+% of you will. Many of you will be like repeat offenders, not once, but twice or 3 times. Now, do the math. 50+% of marriages end in divorce, but at the same time, the vast majority, upwards of 95+% of you will get married at some point down the road, because love is like a drug. We're like addicts. We keep coming back. Something is there incumbent in God's design. Something is there that is euphoric. Something is there that pulls you into love and romance and dating and sexuality. From there, marriage. From there, who knows? And for many people, it falls apart and dysfunction and pain, and people kickstart and restart the cycle all over again. Now, when I look at the world around me, I love the world I'm a part of. I love what God is up to in the universe. But when I look at the world, when I turn on the TV, when I think about film, and all film does is put a finger on the pulse of how millions of people around the world think, I step back and think, wow, something's like not right. Would you agree with that? Like something is, I don't really know what, but something is out of sync. Something's like out of rhythm. Somewhere along the way, we lost the plot line. And that's where the scriptures come into play. Because we come to Jesus, like the Pharisees in the stories, with all kinds of questions, like what's up? Where the world is kind of falling apart, like what does God say? What is God after? Now, back to the story. Let's read Jesus' response. For, haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator, and he quotes Genesis 1, made them male and female, and said, and he quotes Genesis 2, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. The two will become one flesh, end quote. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man what? Separate. Now notice 2 things. First off, where does Jesus go to answer the question? Yeah, the Bible, or what in his day was called the scriptures. He goes right, in fact, to the opening chapter of the opening book. He gets right into Genesis 1 and says, well, here's why everything's a wreck. You lost sight of male and female, and he quotes Genesis 2. You lost sight of marriage and God's intention. He goes right to the scriptures, and that is where we are going to invest the next 2 nights in the scriptures to get at God's thoughts in a world that is really loud and noisy, all sorts of opinions floating around about love. What does God say? Now, secondly, notice, does Jesus answer the question? It's not a trick question, people. Like, it's a yes or no question. Does Jesus answer the question? No, or not really. Not really. What Jesus, and listen, you need to hear what he says because it's brilliant. What Jesus does is he really says you're asking the wrong question. And if you ask the wrong questions, you will get the wrong answers, Confucius say, right? And Jesus says, listen, you're asking the wrong question. The right question is not, hey, how can I get out of marriage? Or the right question is, what is God after in the beginning? What was God's intentionality, for lack of a better word? Meaning, what was God's intent with love and sexuality? If God is creator and if humans are creation, that means who is the expert on sex? God. Who's the expert on love? God. Who's the experts on all? God. And what is God after? Now, here's the plan. Jesus quotes 2 passages, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, and says, listen, here's why everything's out of sync. You lost sight. You lost the plot line. We're going to take tonight out of Genesis 1, kind of thinking about that idea of male and female, and tomorrow night out of Genesis 2, thinking about sexuality and romance leading into marriage. Turn back to Genesis 1. Let's go back to the text Jesus quotes. Genesis 1 in your Bibles. You guys doing all right? Okay. The first one is like the nasty, long, pedantic one. I'm sorry. After that, it gets less long. Genesis 1, here's the text Jesus quotes in Matthew. Genesis 1, let's pick up in 26. God creates, everything. And 26, then God said, let us make man in our image and our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, birds of the air, livestock, all the earth, creatures that move along the ground. So, 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Listen, male and female. Here's the line Jesus quotes. Male and female, he created them. To Jesus, one of the reasons love is all upside down in the world we are a part of is because we have lost sight of the most basic, primal, elementary reality that we as humans are created male and female. Right? From cover to cover, the scriptures kind of teach two truths that live in harmony. The scriptures teach men and women, humans, are created equal, but at the same time are different. Right? Equal, we are both as men and women, as male and female. We are both image bearers of God. We are both made in really kind of reflecting the DNA of what God is like. But at the same time, we are different. I'm a little bit older than 2 or 3 of you. And I have 2 little boys. Jude is 5, Moses is 2. And I don't know anything about girls. Girls are scary. We are adopting one right now, and I'm like really happy and really on pins and needles. But I know boys, and you walk into my house, and it's all about like Jedi Knights and lightsabers and wrestling. Like lots of violence in my house. Like my 2 boys do not get love your enemies. We are working on Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount. But the other day, we have new neighbors who are brand new to the neighborhood over, and the new neighbors have a 2-year-old little girl. Now, she is nothing like my boys, right? She walks in and she's quiet. She's wearing a dress. She's in pink. She's a lady, right? My boys don't walk anywhere. My boys like Jedi Knight everywhere, right? And she walks in, she's quiet, she sits right down on the rug in the living room. Her mommy puts out her toys, and her toys are not like weapons, like in my house. Her toys are like actual toys, right? And she's there with her, what? What does every little 2-year-old have? Her doll, right? Her baby, and she's the mommy, blah, 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 whatever. Jedi Knights are way more fun, in my opinion. But she sits down, and at one point, she puts down the doll, and my 5-year-old, Jude, jumps up, nabs the doll, right? And he starts running around the living room, karate chopping and fighting. And he runs up and he goes, Daddy, ninja doll. Right? And he starts, karate or ninja chopping or whatever. And he takes the pacifier out of the baby's mouth, and he says, Daddy, poison pacifier of death. Very simple point. Lame story, I'm sorry. Men and women are absolutely equal image bearers of God, but yet something kind of incumbent in human DNA, we are different. We are not created as androgynous beings. Now, I know that's really simple, but that's a really subversive idea right now. Would you agree? The idea that God kind of has one image of what femininity looks like and another of what male, that's a really kind of like, I don't know what I think about that. I live in Portland. I don't know if I'm okay with that because, and you all know, the culture or society at large is trying to really blur and bend the lines between male and female. I would argue, and you may not agree, but that the culture is trying to turn guys into chicks, in my opinion, right? Trying to tame and domesticate and emasculate you guys. How many of you guys feel guilty for feeling like a man from time to time? And at the same, I need counseling. Yeah, you're okay. Yes, thank you guys. Right? And at the same time, sisters, how many of you feel guilty at times for your femininity and feel like the culture pushes you. You need to act like a man and look like a man and blah, blah, blah. And story goes on. The culture is trying to chickify dudes and turn ladies into guys. But seriously, like, sisters, your boyfriend, like, he doesn't want a girlfriend who can beat him up. And brothers, your girlfriend does not want a guy who can borrow her pants. Like, that's not... You know I'm right with that. But that is the world. And here's what happens. Listen. Here's what happens. People overreact to the blurring of lines between male and female. And the pendulum swings inside and outside of the church, and you get all sorts of distorted images of masculinity on one hand. No, here, be a man, and here's what a man looks like, boom, boom, boom. And femininity on the other. No, it's all about sexuality or beauty or independence or this, that, or the other. Or whatever your take on masculinity, it swings to the side, and you get distorted images. And how many of you feel at 18, 19, 20, 25 years old with kind of like you're flying blind? Like you have no, what does a man look like? Like, I hear the phrase all the time, be a man. I have no idea what that means. Like, what does that look like? What does femininity look like? Now, that is where Genesis really comes in handy. If you know anything about Genesis, Genesis is a book all about intentionality, meaning about what God intended for everything from planets and solar systems and mountains to humans and sexuality and relationships and love. And in Genesis, and really all over the Bible, you get glimpses. Do you know the Bible has like lots of love stories? Do you guys know that about the Bible? Like there are entire books that are love stories. Anybody read Ruth this morning in the Bible reading plan? Yeah. I did. Yeah, 2 girls were like, yes, Ruth. Yes. Right? Like Ruth is a love story. Song of Songs is absolutely a love story, right? And what you may not know is that in Genesis are 3 of the most famous love stories in all of the Bible, and the one that really stands out, kind of floats to the surface, is that of Isaac and Rebekah. Turn over to Genesis 24. And here's where we're going to really take the entire evening. Genesis 24. Now, if you are wondering, listen, okay, I'm here to figure out how to get a date. Well, we will get to that tomorrow night. I'm sorry. But here, and you're wondering, why are we starting? I could care less about masculinity or femininity. Why are we starting here? Here's why. Jesus starts here, right? You need to get that. Matthew 19. Why is everything falling apart? You have lost the story of why God created humans, male and female. And if you get that wrong, if you get what it looks like to be female or what it looks like to be male wrong, at that point, your trajectory is all off and everything kind of goes down the tube. Now, in the book of Genesis, we get glimpses in the 3 love stories, specifically in Isaac and Rebekah, of what a godly man and woman looks like. Really, if you know anything kind of about Jewish tradition, the story of Isaac and Rebekah is like the paradigm for love, for hundreds of years, the Hebrews really have looked to the story of Isaac and Rebekah for here's what a godly woman looks like, here's what a godly man looks like, here's what love looks like, kind of under the sun. Now, it's in chapters 24 and 25. Chapter 24 is really all about Rebekah. Chapter 25 is really all about Isaac, which means ladies first. Right? And we're going to work through 24. After that, we're going to take a break. And dudes, you are up to bat second out of chapter 25. Now, keep in mind, you are reading a story, which means all that happens here is we get glimpses. It's not an exhaustive list, but we get glimpses of what a godly woman looks like in Rebekah and a godly man in Isaac. Now, she is not perfect, and neither is he. But we get glimpses of the kind of people that God looks down from heaven, so to speak, and God breathes out what today is called the Bible and says, that's the kind of person I want to put in the story. That's the kind of person I want to put up on display. Like, here, she's not perfect, he's not, but here's what a man or God, a woman of God looks like. Ladies first, if you're taking notes, we get 7 glimpses of what a godly woman looks like. Let's get to work. You guys ready? And yes, I'm a dude teaching on femininity. Shut up. Genesis 24, I'm in Exodus. Genesis 24, Abraham, opening line, was now old and well advanced in years. The Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the chief servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh. More on that one later. 3, I want you to swear by the Lord, Yahweh, the God of heaven, the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites. All right, here's to bring you up to speed. Here's the story. There's a dude named Abraham, many sons. One of his sons goes by the name of Isaac. Now, Isaac is pushing 40, which means it's time to grow up, get a job, and get a wife. Now, in that day, in that culture, ancient Near East, it was the father's responsibility to get a wife for his son. Abraham is about to kick the bucket. He says, all right, we need a wife for Isaac. And he sends his servant out to get a wife. And he says, listen, here is what you look for. Here's what a godly woman in today's language looks like. Here's what you are after. Back to, I think, 3. You will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living. But, promise me, you will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. Listen, you need to promise me, he says, that she's not going to be from the Canaanites who are like pagans, who are all about immorality and idolatry and all sorts of gnarly stuff. Listen, you need to promise me she will be from my family. Now, if you know how Genesis works, in chapter 12, God promises to save the entire world. That is a promise we live in today. But God promises to do that through a family, through Abraham and his sons and daughters, later called Israel, later called the Messiah, called Jesus. But right here, he says, listen, she needs to be from my family. First off, if you are taking notes, what does a godly woman look like? First off, she's part of God's family. I know that's really simple, but that needs to be said. She is part of God's family. She is in the story of how God is about to rescue and redeem the entire creation. She is in on that. She is from God's family, and she is up for that story. Keep in mind, there are 2 types of, in today's language, Christians. You have believers and you have followers. But then, I mean, believers are kind of like, you know, your standard kind of nominal, yeah, I believe in God, along with like billions of other people on the planet, good for you. And you go to church from time to time, and you are nice. Fabulous. Welcome. Glad you're here. Followers are people who hear Jesus, who all the time says, come, follow me. Well, what's that cost? Well, life. Take your cross with you, right? Don't pack your bags, pack your cross. And people who are followers are people whose ultimate driving pneumatic passion is Jesus. Like, Jesus is what he or she is after. That is ultimate. That is like at the top of, that is everything. The center of your universe is Jesus. What are you about? I follow Jesus. And that is what you are going for, brothers and sisters, whether it's male or female. That is what you are after. And what a godly woman looks like is she is part of God's family and she follows Jesus. Now, for you sisters, if you want to recapture what femininity looks like, that will happen in pursuit of Jesus, right? Not in front of a movie. That will happen when you sit and you follow Jesus on the pages of the text and through the streets of life. That is where you will recapture who you really are, what God really intended for you. You are a created being. Whether you agree with that or disagree, that is, put simply, fact. That is reality. You are made. And God knows what he made you to be. And you will rediscover that as you follow Jesus. And for you dudes, and it goes both ways here, like seriously, do not even think about going after somebody who is not a part of God's family and following Jesus. Like, do not even go there. You all know the story. I could take 10 minutes. We could turn to 2 Corinthians 6. I could rail on you about that crazy first century quote there, do not be unequally yoked. And we don't even know what the heck that means, but we get the idea, right? Do not think about going there. There is no possible way to keep two souls together if at the center you do not have the gospel of Jesus. That is what matters more than anything. Simple? Yeah, absolutely, but needs to be said. She's a part of God's family. Let's keep reading. 5, the servant asked him, what if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from? What if she's like, listen, I'm not leaving my family, not leaving my friends, my job, all of that. Here's what Abraham says. 6, make sure that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household, my native land, who spoke to me, promised me an oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you. Crazy, like real story. So that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there. Listen, if she's not willing to leave her family, her friends, and follow you, like she is not the right fit. She is not the right one for my son Isaac. Secondly, if you're taking notes, what does a godly woman look like? She's willing to follow. She's willing to follow her husband wherever he leads. Now, I know that's kind of a crazy idea, and we think, like, people really think like that? Yeah, I would argue God thinks like that. Now, if you go back to Genesis 2, and if I had time, I would walk you through all of Genesis 2 in depth. But if you go back and you kind of erect and construct a biblical theology of marriage, you get at the reality God made Adam first, not first as in more important, but first as in like literally before Eve. And before Eve comes along, before woman comes along, God gives Adam a calling or mission or job or whatever language you like. He tells Adam to take care of the entire Garden of Eden. Now here's the problem. The Garden of Eden is the size of the entire ancient Near East. That's like, hey Bob, you're in charge of North America, like gardening. Go, have fun, right? Can you imagine you're Adam, you're like, seriously? Like, I need help. He cannot do what God calls him into by himself. And God says, okay, it's not good for man to be alone. I will make him what is the woman called long before she's called woman? Helper. Now that sounds kind of derogatory in English, and it's really not. But the idea is she is his mate, his equal, and she comes alongside to partner with Adam, to follow Adam, and to help Adam on the mission or the calling or the job God put in front of him. That's how all healthy relationships work. You have a man who's created by God, who's after God, who is following Jesus with a specific calling, like here's what God's calling me into. And you have a woman who follows that lead, who comes into that not bringing her agenda to bear on him, as nothing wrong with dreams and visions. All that is really healthy. But she comes alongside to help Adam down the path. She's willing to follow. That's what happens in the story right here. That's what Paul kind of rephrases in that really well-known passage in Ephesians 5, I think we'll get to later tonight, where Paul says, husbands, love your wives, and wives, submit to your husbands. And the idea here is not like he's the boss and you obey whatever he says, like, woman, go. Like, no, you're dumb. I'm sorry, guys. Like, you're like, really? No, that's not what the text means. The idea with submit to your husband is follow. Like, where is God leading him? A godly woman is up for that. A godly woman steps into that story and follows her husband. She's willing to follow. Now let's keep reading. Back to the story. 9. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. Awkward. Ancient Near East background here. When you would make a vow, you would put your hand on the upper thigh of your master as a sign of vulnerability and trust. Now, my buddy Brooke, who is playing drums, and we have taken up this practice. And a while back, we made a vow. It's about 2, I think, years ago. And we were looking around at dudes who were kind of hitting 25, 26 and starting to pack on the pounds. And we said, woo, it's a slow beginning of the end. God bless you guys. And we made a vow to stay thin as long as we both shall live. And I put my hand under his, what we call the UI thigh vow, under his upper inner thigh. And he put his hand under my upper inner thigh. And it was really freaking awkward. And I looked deep into his eyes and says, I promise I will eat healthy and exercise as long as I am able. And he said, I promise. And we were done. And I went home and took like 5 showers. Just a thought for you guys. Just kind of thinking along. 10. Then the servant, moving along, took 10 of his master's camels and left, taking with him all kinds of good things from his master. He set out for Aram something and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time women go out to draw water. 12. Then he prayed, Yahweh, God of my master Abraham, give me success today. Show kindness to my master. See, I'm standing beside the spring. The daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, please let down your jar that I may have a drink. New line right there, guys. And she says, drink, all water your camels too. Oh my goodness. Let her be the one you have chosen for your servant. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Notice before we move on, he's out searching for his wife. I think there's that tension. In Proverbs, I want to say Proverbs 18, God says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and receives favor from the Lord. The word finds there in Hebrew can be translated, go out and search for something that's lost. It's kind of an aggressive word. The idea is, on one hand, you go out looking. And on the other hand, like your spouse, your wife is really from the Lord. God is the one from the earliest love story, Adam and Eve. God is the one who brings Eve to Adam. God is the one who brings, in the story here, Rebekah to Isaac. And you kind of live in that tension. But I love how the story goes. The servant's like, where are the young single ladies? At the well. The time women go out to draw water. All right, let's go to the well. Back to the story, 15. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. Now the girl, notice 16, the first thing we read about Rebekah. The girl was very what? Beautiful. And here's a really interesting idea. That's the first thing we read. 3, if you're taking notes. What is a godly woman like? She is, and I quote, very beautiful. Now listen, I know I'm kind of on thin ice here. Because we live in a hyper-Hellenistic culture where people worship beauty, and by beauty I mean like Aphrodite, like the goddess of sexuality kind of beauty, like the 6-foot-tall, 90 pounds, you eat spinach and pine nuts every day beauty, right? That kind of fake, plastic, surreal, because we live in a culture that worships to the nth degree beauty in various forms. What happens all the time outside, and I think more than anything inside the church, is people freak out, overreact, pendulum swings, and you kind of end up in like a really unhealthy, Platonic, dualistic idea where, hey, beauty is bad, and what really matters is like the you on the inside, which, by the way, is totally unbiblical theology. There is no you on the inside. There's you. And you is every square inch of you. Me is my ginormous ears. Me is the fact that I live in Portland, I'm 30, and I cannot grow a beard. God, where are you? Seriously. Will never amount to anything in life, right? But that is all part of me, for good, for better, or for worse. And people freak out and think of beauty as a bad thing. Now, does God think beauty is bad? No, open up your eyes, look up at the heavens. Go on a walk. Walk through the forest. Open up your eyes. God is really, really, really into beauty. Now, beauty, yes, gets kind of distorted into Hellenism, and that is dark and demonic and really dangerous. But in its pure form, beauty is something really, really beautiful. Turn over if you want. You don't need to, but if you want, turn over to 1 Peter chapter 3. I think because we don't always understand the difference between vanity and beauty. Right? Vanity is like the external, ungodly, shallow kind of worship of femininity. But beauty is something, I think, different that Peter gets at in 1 Peter chapter 3. You guys doing all right? 1 Peter 3, let's pick up in the opening line. Wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Notice 3, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as braided hair or the wearing of gold jewelry and fine clothes. Nobody here who looks like that right now. 4, instead, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. My wife, I think, is like the epitome of what Peter here calls a gentle and quiet spirit. There is a kind of beauty that it's hard to put words on. Am I right, guys and sisters? There is a kind of beauty that really has nothing to do with whether or not you eat spinach and pine nuts every day. There is a kind of beauty that really emanates from the inside out. Now, do not misunderstand Peter. He's not saying real beauty is on the inside. Do not misunderstand him. He's saying real beauty starts on the inside and works its way out. He's not saying how you look doesn't matter, your physicality doesn't matter at all. He's saying all the kind of vain, ungodly, Hellenistic trims and trappings, all the kind of distorted images of femininity, yeah, strike all of that. But there's another kind of beauty made by God that comes from the inside out. Notice he goes on in 5, for this is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to make themselves beautiful. Like put effort into beauty. What kind of holy women from the past? They were submissive or follow to their own husbands, like Sarah. She's the mother-in-law of Rebekah, who obeyed Abraham, called to her master, you are her daughters if you do what is right. You do not give way to fear. And you do not end up in the like broken cycles of Hellenistic worship, of unrealistic beauty, but rather you put effort into a beauty that really kind of emanates from the inside out. What my wife would say, I hear my wife all the time who's like talking with young gals. Her advice, and I'm quoting my wife here, if you disagree, her problem, right? But her advice is always the same. Listen, do the best with what you have. And this goes for you too, guys. I work out all the time. Obviously. And I don't use steroids. Isn't that that's a joke, people. Look at that. There's nothing there. Nothing there. Trying. Holy cow. My goodness. But do the best with what you have as an act of love and generosity and serving one day your future spouse. Not kind of plunging into Hellenism on one hand or overreacting and freaking out and thinking, well, if he really loves me, he will love me for what's inside. And it's a really nice idea, and that's not how God thinks. Beauty is something that starts on the inside and without kind of falling into pieces by how the world thinks, goes out from there. Now, back to the story. She's beautiful in the story. The author goes out of his way to point out that she is beautiful. Let's keep reading. The next thing, 16, the girl is very beautiful, a what? Virgin. No man had ever lain with her. For, if you're taking notes, she's a virgin. She's pure. I think we all know like purity is really important. We're going to get into that really all over Genesis 2 tomorrow with Mike. It's going to be really fun. But here's one of the problems I think. When I hear about purity in the church, it's almost always from a male perspective. Most of the teachers in the church are dudes. And that comes with some problems at times. Because we think of purity as a male problem when really it's a human problem. Would you agree with that? If not, read your Bible. But seriously, it's a human problem on both sides. You hear all sorts of talk about guys and lust and pornography and all of that is true and valid. But what we don't talk about enough is the reality that purity goes both ways. In the ancient wisdom tradition, I think it comes down to it takes two to to tango, right? I mean, it seriously really does. My wife, quoting my wife again, I'm going to give her all the unpopular quotes, but we're talking the other day about tonight's talk, and she says, and my wife is about the most magnanimous, gracious, I mean, she lives with me, seriously, gracious, patient person on the planet, and she said in like a moment of like kind of angst, she said, listen, I'm sick and tired of women not taking responsibility for sexual sin. Women who do not own up, who blame sexual sin on boyfriends or guys. Listen, that's simply, and she's right. That's not the way forward. And what God calls not only men to, but God calls the sisters to, is to really guard your mind. Now, please listen. What pornography is to men, or what lust as a junk drawer is to men, fantasy, I would argue chick flicks, are to women. You need to get that. Men and women are equal, but what? Different, and we think different, we feel different, we operate different. What lust is to men, fantasy is to women. What pornography often is to men, chick flicks, I would argue, often are to the sisters. For example, there is no such thing as a freaking vegetarian vampire, right? Like, I hope you get that. Like, he's not real, right, guys? What's his name? Yeah, seriously, like, dudes, give me some love here. Like, I'm helping you out, right? Like, he is a myth. He is a demonic lie. Now, I'm not saying that all chick flicks are like from hell at all. Only most. But that one, I think, may be. But I think that really encapsulates how off we are and how we think about love, how we think about romance. And here's what happens. Because for men, lust turns into a Hellenistic, upside-down, unrealistic version of beauty. Women stop trying. Who cares? I can't keep up with her. I can't keep up with that. The exact same thing happens on the other end. Men kind of look at all sorts of unrealistic images about how a man should act. And I can't do that. I can't keep up with him. I can't put up with her like Edward can. I can't. I have not seen that movie. I hear she's a jerk in real life. Like, it doesn't work that way, ladies. I'm sorry. But that's what happens. Guard your mind. We're going to get in really in depth tomorrow to purity. But that you need to get, please listen, that goes both ways. You need male or female, wherever you are coming from, guard your mind. There's a phrase in Proverbs that says, guard your heart. And the word heart in Hebrew it's very kind of different than the English word heart. It means your thinking and your feeling, how you think, how you feel. Guard your heart, Solomon says, for out of your heart flow the issues of life. Keep a really close watch on your heart, on your thinking, and on your feeling, on your mind, because out of that flow the issues that really you are going to wrestle with for better or for worse in the coming years. Now let's keep going. Story goes on. 16, she went down to the spring, filled her jar, came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, please, give me a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have finished drinking. So she quickly, notice the language, emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journeys successful. Number 5, if you're taking notes, notice she's hardworking. She's like industrious. I mean, she's not sitting around like cleaning up baby barf all day, right? Like, she's working hard. I think we have all kinds of distorted images. Outside the church, you hear a woman only has value if she works and she makes 6 figures a year and blah, blah, blah. Inside the church, you kind of hear, well, there's no value in that. Both are wrong. Both are not what God is after in the scriptures. Think about really the examples of femininity all over the Bible. Think about Proverbs 31, who's the archetype of what a godly woman looks like. She's industrious and hardworking. She's an entrepreneur. She's in real estate. She's running multiple businesses out of her home. She's up early. I mean, she's like all over the place. Think of Ruth, who's working hard for her mother all the time. Think of Rebecca here, who's working, drawing waters, running. But notice the common thread in every single one, and it goes for men as well, is the idea that she is working to serve. She's a servant. Now, if you know anything about Jesus, you know he's really into the whole servant motif. right? Male, female does not matter. Jesus is really on the idea of serving one another. I think Jesus puts it like this: the greatest among you will be your what? Will be your what? You guys awake? Will be your what? Your servant. The greatest person here. I don't know how many people are in here tonight, but lots of people. The greatest person here will be your servant. That is what she is like. That was one of the first things I fell in love with about my wife, sister's secret. And it goes both ways. But dudes love ladies who are servants. And it goes both ways. Dudes. Right. No. Yes. Like I said. Right? I remember I was falling in love with my wife, Tammy. And I was playing in a band with her older brother. And we were roommates, and we would go practice back at her family's house in the basement. And she would come down, and now I understand she was like fully flirting and like total agenda. At the time, I thought she was really like godly and stuff. She is, don't worry. But she would come down, do you want any coffee? Yes. Do you want a boyfriend? Yes. Right, do you want any tea? Do you want any food? And she would always come down singing. I was like, seriously, she sings? Oh, right? Like, but that does something, because when somebody serves another human being, you join in the way of Jesus. You have different kinds of relationships. First off, you have relationships where you have two takers. That always ends in divorce or disaster. You have relationships where you have one giver and one taker. That always ends in really abuse. And you have relationships where you have two givers. We have two servants, where you have a man who says, I'm going to serve my lady. And you have a lady who says, I'm going to serve my man. And two people go back and forth. That's what she's like in the story. She's intelligent, she's sharp, she's hardworking, and she's a servant, and she serves the man. Now let's keep reading. 22, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a becca. She's like super indie rock fashionista. Gold nose ring, right? Dude in the front, yeah. 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She answered him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son that Milcah bore to Nahor. She added, we have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night. The man bowed down, worshiped the Lord, saying, praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness, his faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relative. And the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now skip down to 59. We don't have time to read the entire story. She runs off. She tells her mom, her dad, guess who's here? Guess what's up? I'm going to marry, so on and so forth. Mom and dad are okay with all of that. And 59, they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, notice the blessing, our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the gates of your enemies. Now get that. Like the blessing is not, may you look hot when you are 55. Right? Like think about how different value systems kind of change down through time, right? And what culture values, what society at large values, is not the same thing as what God values. Would you agree with that? Like, that's what happens to me all the time reading the scriptures. I'm like, holy cow, like, God values something different from me. And here the value is, listen, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May you grow and become a wife and a mother. And now, number 6, if you're taking notes, and we're going to wrap up here in a minute, she wants to become a mother. Now, that does not mean that all godly women need to be a mom like tomorrow and like blessings of fertility upon you. Like, not at all. But you need to get at it's a value to God. Because we live in a culture that at times really does not value that, or at least, ladies, makes you feel as if that's not enough. Am I right? Makes you feel, listen, if that's your passion, if that's what God's calling you into to grow and become a mother, listen, what's wrong with you? You're not intelligent, or are you not with it? Are you, like, what's wrong with you? And that's where the scriptures, where God simply frees you from all of those obligations, all of those pressures, all of those stigmas, and you listen, you have what the world values, you have what God values. And one of the many things God values is when a woman becomes a mother. There's a crazy line in Timothy where Paul says, woman shall be saved in childbearing And people read that as like a sexist kind of line, and that's not at all how I read that line. I think what God is saying is when a woman becomes a mother, something redemptive happens. She joins in God's saving of the world when she steps into that spot. I will never forget the day, one of the first conversations I had with my now wife, asking her, hey, what do you want to do with your life? What are your dreams and hopes and all of that? And she had dreams, she had hopes, but like really right up at the top was, you know what I really want? What my dreams are? I really want to become a mom. And I said, I really want to become a dad. Like, I may be able to help you here. Right, love? And here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Right? But, that was one of the most attractive things to me, to fall in love with a woman who really was not swayed by the stigmas of culture, really was not swayed. And now, as a father watching my wife, I think it takes more brains, more intelligence, more education, more stamina, more independence, more leadership ability to be a mom, for sure, than to do what I do. Like, it's insane. That is what I respect and love and value and appreciate about my wife, I would argue more than anything. There are many traits about my wife. I love her love for God, her beauty, her personality. But that is what if push comes to shove, that is like top for me, what I love about my wife the most. And you need to get at that, men and women. When you're looking at somebody or dating somebody or thinking about somebody, you're not only looking at a wife, you're looking at a potential mother. You're not only looking at a husband, you're looking at a potential father. And what you need to understand is that your children one day, your offspring in the language of Genesis, will reflect your spouse's character, for better or worse. Like your offspring will mimic and mirror and shadow what your wife or your husband is like, for better or for worse. That is one of the most absolutely terrifying truths on the planet for moms and dads. And you need to think about that when you are growing. Is your life, sisters and brothers, is your life something that you want anybody to emulate? Is your life something that you want anybody to mimic and grow up to be like? Or is the person you are with or dating or thinking about or flirting with, is that somebody you would think, wow, to have a son who's like that man? Wow, to have a daughter who's like that woman. Because that is part of what it means. I'm not saying everybody needs to have kids and tomorrow and blah, blah, blah. No, not at all. But that is something God values. And you need to get at that. She wants to step into that spot. One more. Let's keep reading. 61. Then Rebekah and her maids got ready and mounted their camels, went back with the man. Notice Rebekah and her maids. Seriously, like thousands of years ago, every woman has her posse. Am I right, guys? She's like hard to get at. Seriously. All the single guys are like, I want to ask her out, but she's like in the little Estro castle over there. And it's like the defenses, the walls are up. Dudes, like, get her alone, pick her off. Like, go. We believe in you. But here she is thousands of years ago, Rebekah and her maid. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now, 62, Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate. We're going to talk about that in a bit. And as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel, asked the servant, who is that man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took, notice, listen, she took her veil and covered herself. Here's a woman who is, and I quote, very beautiful. Her man walks up, and what's her response? Oh, she covered herself. Now, in that day and age, wearing your hair down in public was a sign of immodesty, like wearing a bikini around town today. Like, seriously, right? And hot dude Isaac walks up, and she covered her beauty with modesty. And that's last, if you're taking notes, 7. Glimpses. What does a godly woman look like? She's modest, for starters. I get asked, and it's really kind of weird to me, but that's not weird actually, but I get asked all the time by the brothers, seriously, will you please, we love the sisters, we love going to church, but will you please ask the sisters to finish dressing before they come to church? Like, we really like your outfit, but would you finish putting your outfit on? And you need to, and I don't mean to be harsh or rude, but you need to get at modesty. Beauty covered by modesty is something God values. A really beautiful, attractive woman can look incredible in a turtleneck and a jacket. Now, I'm not saying, sisters, you all need to wear muumuus at all, right? But you need to understand men and women are different. And men are more so, not only, but men are more so visual creatures, right? What to you is like, oh, Forever 21, on special, little spring dress. Guys are like, get behind me, Satan! Ah! And you have brothers all around you who seriously are fighting to live pure, fighting to live the way of Jesus, holding out for a spouse one day. You need to help your brothers. You need to serve your brothers everywhere you go. And you need to understand that there are two reasons I think we have lots of immodesty, even inside the church. I think one is because you have some women who simply want attention. And guys, that's really dangerous because odds are she does not want a man's attention. Odds are she wants men's attention. And you will not be able to satisfy that no matter how hard you try. But what I think is way more common is you simply have women who are naive, and I don't mean to be rude at all, but you don't get behind me, Satan. Like, you don't get how that really affects the guys. And God's calling on you is beauty covered by modesty. You can be attractive, you can be beautiful, you can be stylish, but no guy is going to ask, no godly man is going to ask a girl out, much less marry a woman who's immodest. He may notice her, he may flirt with her, he may like her, but he's not going to go down that path because it's not a value. And that is a value to God. She is one who, unlike all the world around her, she's beauty covered by modesty. And notice the end of 24. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah. He married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. That's the end of the story. No like long drama. Like, hi, what's your name? Rebecca? Here's my mom's tent. Let's go. Okay, wedding night. But don't get me wrong. It's a love story. The text here, one of the most famous lines in the Old Testament. She became his wife and he what? He loved her. It's a love story from top through and through. It's a love story. Now, before we take a break, and Isaac shows up in 25, and we get into Isaac next. Here's the last thought I want to leave you with. You will marry somebody who's a reflection of who you really are. And you will marry somebody who mirrors and reflects your character, your person. Put simply, if you're not passionate about Jesus, why would you expect to marry somebody who is? If you're not like chasing down the kingdom of God, why would you expect to marry somebody who is? If you're not serious about going somewhere with your life, why would you expect to marry somebody who is? If you're not caring for your body, why would you expect to marry someone who is? If you're not nice, why would you expect to marry somebody who is, right? Odds are, not always, but odds are you will marry somebody who reflects you for better or worse, which is why the question is not like about finding the right person. It's really not. We're going to get into that later in the Q&A, but the question is about being the right person. The question is not like who is she or who is he or where is he at or where is she at. The question is who am I? What does a godly woman look like if you're female? What does a godly man look like if you're a dude? What does that look like? And how do I step into that? And I want you to think about that tonight, tomorrow, in the coming days and weeks. I want you to think about it. It's not about finding the right person. It's about being the right person. You will marry somebody who reflects you. May you grow in Jesus every single day. Amen?